You ever find yourself in a situation that makes you think, who on earth is in charge here? Sometimes it seems like either nobody is steering the ship or whoever is at the helm can't tell the difference between a cloud and an iceberg. In our daily lives and across history, the feeling is all too common because states and governments of all sizes are human constructions, complications and all. Whatever lofty ideals they might aspire to, decisions ultimately get made by humans who could be at their best or their worst, or even in direct competition with each other. This applies to republics, monarchies, and off-the-wall nonsense like an elected theocracy. Enter the Pope. Holy ruler of the Catholic Church and the head honcho of Christianity for most of its 2,000-year history. When it comes to, say, medieval European religion, it should be pretty obvious. He's in charge. But viewers, it is never that simple when we are dealing with Pope fights. And so we embark upon a story of scandal, slanders, secular squabbles, suspicious lines of succession, and apparently a lot of sex. See, the span of years from 896 to 964 is known to history as the Pornocracy. Yes, it is actually called that. The name comes from the Greek meaning rule of prostitutes, which is a title so sensational that we can get a whiff of an agenda here. Mayhaps a little grudge wafting out from our sources. Keep that skepticism in mind as we dive into the salacious story of the Pornocracy to see if it was really so awful, learn what was actually going on in the wider history of the papacy, and figure out who on earth is in charge here. Now let's do some history. Our tale kicks off in 896 with the appointment of Stephen VI as Pope, whose first order of business was litigating the actions of his predecessor Pope Formosus by ripping him out of the ground and putting his corpse on trial. The details of the case and whatever Stephen was hoping to accomplish didn't matter for long because the Roman people were so affronted by the morbid spectacle they deposed, imprisoned, and strangled him. And in the decade after, Rome saw 2 more popes get deposed. So at the turn of the century, if the popes clearly weren't in charge, then who was? That would be the family of Theophylact I, count of a nearby hill town called Tusculum. Him and his wife Theodora were well-to-do and well-connected, arranging for the appointment of Sergius III as Pope in 904. But hold on, aren't popes supposed to be elected? Yes, but at this stage in the game, the Pope was chosen by a nebulous agreement between Rome's citizens and aristocrats, which is conveniently very gameable. In exchange, Sergius made Theophylact Vestararius and Magister Militum, putting him in charge of papal finances and the armies and effectively making him the ruler of Rome. And that kind of power outlasts any one pope and any one count, because Theophylact appointed 2 more popes before his death in 924, and his family continued to hold the reins of Rome and its popes for most of the next century. Okay, so definitely a departure from the saintly aura the papacy would normally aim for. Can't really feel like Sergius is the will of God when he's quite abundantly the will of that power-hungry aristocrat over there, but realpolitik is hardly a scandal in the world of 900s Italy. Certainly no more shocking than corpse court a decade earlier, so what's the problem? Well, Theophylact was one of 3 power brokers in his family, as there was his wife Theodora and their daughter Marozia, both of whom earned the title of senatrix in their careers. These 2 people were powerful women, dramatic gasp, and they allegedly had sex with people. Oh no, the papacy is in ruins. What will St. Peter do when he finds out what sex is because of this? Well, if he didn't know before, St. Pete was sure gonna find out now because Pope Sergius broke his priestly vow of chastity with a still teenaged Marozia, allegedly fathering the future Pope John XI. Keep track of all these allegedlys, we'll crack that open in a minute. The papal philandering continued, intensified even, during the papacy of John X, who mingled with one matriarch after the other. He was appointed in 914, supposedly slammed down with Theodora until her death in 916, and then in the years after, he gave Marozia the title of senatrix as part of their own sinful love affair. But alas, it wasn't to last, and after their falling out, Marozia married Guy of Tuscany, with whom she attacked Rome, arrested the Pope in the city, and had him jailed and killed, appointing the next 2 popes and then installing her own son as John XI. But not all of Marozia's sons were so pliable, as another son by her first marriage, Alberic, objected to her 3rd marriage to King Hugh of Italy with his northern sensibilities and sus foreign armies, so in 923, during the wedding ceremony, Alberic threw a coup, imprisoning Marozia for 5 years until she died in jail. Bad news for Marozia, but Alberic swiped her role as Rome's #1 power broker and ruled the city for the next 22 years, handpicking the next 4 popes between his brother John XI and his son John XII. All in all, the Theophylacti dynasty ruled Rome and puppeteered its pope across 60 straight years, 4 generations, and 2 infamous matriarchs. Now, obviously, the holy office of Pope being swayed from its sacred purpose, taking orders from aristocrats and canoodling outside of celibacy vows is bad on principle, but like, come on, we've seen way worse than this. Even taking every scandalous fact, can we say this 60-year span is really the lowest the papacy has ever stooped? Forget the Reformation, the political squabbles with kings and emperors, the corruption and wars of the Renaissance, or a century of anti-popes. No, it's the time a lady was in charge that Rome was at its most godless. And who is is saying anyway? Who benefits from this being the worst thing to ever happen to Catholicism? Well, that's an interesting question, because our most vivid accounts come from one Liutprand of Cremona, writing a few decades after this all went down. Liutprand got his start working for King Hugh of Italy and knew Marozia insofar as she married his boss and almost got him killed at their wedding. His career path later took him to Constantinople on diplomacy and landed him in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I, in whose employ he had to contend with Marozia's grandson, Pope John XII. From Liutprand's perspective, the Theophylacti family was a thorn in his side for his entire life, and that loathing figures mightily in his 6-decade history of Italy. This book just so happens to be where the overwhelming majority of the anti-Theophylacti slander derives from, with such stories as Marozia fathering one pope by another pope, or how John XII died from a paralyzing sickness that struck him during an act of adultery. Sure, buddy. Sure. Liutprand is the most detailed and by far the sauciest account from the period, but he is not the only one, as chronicler Eugenius Vulgarius claims that Theodora was full of virtue. Contrasting evidence. And other sources critical of popes from the era don't even approach Liutprand's wild claims. What likely really happened is our trusty pal Ludipatuti over here had a blinding bias favoring his employers King Hugh and Emperor Otto, and spiced up his personal grudges by fabricating low-grade smut. This is the worst kind of history writing. It's just trash. So if the pornocracy as described wasn't even that bad and likely wasn't even true, why on earth did any of this stick? Well, Liutprand had his biases, and later Protestant scholars in Germany did too, citing this era to highlight the evil, awful terribleness of the Pope, coining pornocracy and other related words to describe this church-shattering harlotry. Their logic being that it wasn't just one particularly corrupt year in 1517 when Martin Luther decided enough was enough. No, the church in Rome was always illegitimate, and even worse, those two women were having sex about it. Gross. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church wasn't exactly itching to dredge up one of its messiest chapters to defend itself. It's way easier to just hit them with a "God works in mysterious ways," brand the era as an unfortunate spat of sinfulness, and swiftly change the topic. The result being the pornocracy narrative went functionally uncontested. So viewers, I tell you this story not to paint Marozia's alleged boning bonanza as girl boss behavior all along, or besmirch the honor of the Catholic Church, as if Pope fights is the straw that'll break that camel's back, but to put all this historical vilification into actual context. It's easy to see this period as either a scandal to be leveraged or a mess that's easier to ignore, but if we zoom out and look at Rome and the Pope in relation to the wider Christian world, we can see the pornocracy as one step in a process, namely figuring out who on earth is in charge here. Start in the mid-700s. The Papal States have just become independent after centuries as a province of the Byzantine Empire, and with potential rivals to the north and south, that's a precarious spot, so they turned to the Frankish kingdom for protection and offered in return the one thing they had to give: cultural prestige, crowning the Frankish King Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. For the next half-century, this arrangement works. The Emperor insulates Rome from conflict and gets to call himself Emperor, and the Pope can focus on Pope stuff. Who's in charge? A bit of both of them. But then, in 843, the Empire splits up and Carolingian power rapidly withers in the decades after. So Rome has to start looking out for itself, and the Papacy is too fickle an office to fit that bill. At the turn of the 900s, the logical answer to this vacuum is that aristocrats do what they do best: grab for power. So in comes the Theophylacti family, matriarchs and all, to steer the ship for 60 years. They're in charge. But how did they eventually lose power? Well, the papacy of John XII was tricky. There was trouble to the south from Capua and trouble to the north from the King of Italy. So for protection, he looked beyond the Alps to King Otto of Germany, crowning him Holy Roman Emperor in exchange for protection. But then John got anxious about such a powerful emperor so close to home, so he tried to form a league against the guy he just crowned, but was found out, deposed, and replaced by a pope more favorable to the emperor. Who's in charge now? Well, Otto and Sons strengthened the church overall by bringing the clergy into the imperial administration, but the emperor still picked all the popes, so point for the HRE. As for Roman politics, the aristocratic Crescentii family rose to power in the latter 900s when the emperor installed one of them as pope. By the turn of the 1000s, the Crescentii grew strong enough to pull the strings of the papacy, but they in turn got violently overthrown by our pals the Theophylacti. With a little imperial help, they seized Rome in 1012 and took the papacy for themselves, getting back in charge with a direct family dynasty of popes. Now, on paper, not great, but over the next 30 years, this arrangement actually made the pope stronger and more independent politically, as that power directly benefited the family. However, this fell apart during the reign of their third boy, none other than the flip-flopping three-time Pope Benedict IX from the original Pope fights. Dang! Throwback. He was ultimately deposed with help from the emperor, and soon after, Pope Nicholas II changed the rules so the pope would be elected by a vote of cardinals. This, of course, is not the end of the story, as the thorny matter of who's in charge of Christendom would spill out over the next 3 centuries of geopolitical slap fights, investiture controversy, and Guelph Ghibelline wars, to name just 2. But for the question of who is in charge of Rome and who is in charge of the pope, this is when we get our answer. The pope is in charge of his office and his state. The Papal States combined political, economic, military, religious, and diplomatic power in one man without any prior model for what an office that powerful should look like. That's what this era is really about. The so-called Pornocracy is a scandal hatched by the most dishonest, axe-grindiest chronicler in medieval history, but the evolution of power in the Papal States is a subject worth investigating. And what we see is a complex, open-air trial and error as different factions compete to define the papacy and the church overall, leading to the Pope and his state being far more secure by the end of the 1000s than ever before. At the cost of St. Peter learning what sex is, I think we can all grow up and deal with it. That's just another day in Pope fights. Thank you for watching. You can truly never go wrong with a good old-fashioned Pope fight, especially when it's also kind of a stealth history makers too. Not that Liutprand really deserves the spotlight, but for better and mostly worse, here we are. Meanwhile, thanks to our amazing community of patrons, and stay tuned for next week's Halloween special. This will be one for the books.